In June 1965, Algeria underwent a bloodless coup, not through popular uprising, but through a military seizure of power. Ahmed Ben Bella, the country's first president, was overthrown by his own army chief, Colonel Houari Boumediene. It was the end of one era and the beginning of a new regime, built not on the ideals of democracy and pluralism, but on military discipline, technocratic control, and centralized state power. What followed would shape the next 2 decades of Algerian history. On October 3, 1963, Ben Bella assumed the full powers granted by the Article 59 of the Constitution. Backed by the army, he moved to centralize authority even further, under provisions that gave him near absolute control. He combines the functions of head of state and head of government. He appoints in all civil and military positions. He is the supreme leader of the armed forces of the Republic. However, from the end of 1963 onwards, Boumediene made the army a privileged state within the state. The National People's Army, the only fully organized and generously funded institution in the country, began to see itself not just as part of the state, but as the state itself. The crisis of the summer of 1965 allows the army to progress in this direction. This crisis reflects the paradox of Ben Bella's policies. Though his power depended on the army, he tried to undermine the authority of its leader, Houari Boumediene. Having emptied the party of its democratic revolutionary elements, Ben Bella found himself alone against Boumediene. He strives in vain to reduce the latter's invasive influence by trying to disband the famous Oujdan group, solidly united around its leader Boumediene. Little by little, Ben Bella becomes a prisoner of the army. Tensions escalated when Ben Bella targeted Boumediene's most loyal ally, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, attempting to strip him of the foreign ministry. This triggered a major crisis. The crisis ended on June 19, 1965, when Ben Bella was deposed in a military coup. His removal failed to spark any significant public outcry, despite his supposed 95% victory in the so-called presidential elections. Following the coup d'etat, Ahmed Ben Bella is imprisoned and is replaced by Colonel Boumediene. By this military overthrow, Algeria therefore found itself without a constitution. But it has not become, nor will it become under this regime, a democratic or pluralist state. From his speech on July 5, 1965, on the occasion of the 3rd anniversary of independence, Colonel Boumediene sets out the theoretical foundations of the state. It is important to build a state based on morality and real social commitment, while respecting our Arab and Islamic values. Having ensured the seizure of power by Ben Bella, the army now assumes political power. High-ranking military officers were placed at the head of national companies and appointed as provincial governors. The army thus deployed some of its elements in the political space, as it would have deployed armored units in strategic positions during combat. The regime resulting from the coup d'etat of June 19, 1965, opted for state capitalism deemed more effective in getting the country out of economic and industrial underdevelopment. Powerful national companies, such as the National Company for Hydrocarbon Research and Marketing, or Sonatrach, and the National Steel Company, or SNS, created respectively in December 1963 and September 1964, formed the backbone of an ambitious industrialization program. The Algerian state opts on the economic level for the accumulation of capital and the centralization of investment decisions, and on the ideological level for an amalgamation between Arabo-Islamic nationalism, anti-imperialism, socialism, and nationalizations. This state capitalism created structures for the development of a dominant and privileged group, the state and bureaucratic fraction of the elite class. Economically, the situation of workers and the unemployed continues to deteriorate. From the beginning of 1976, Algeria experienced work stoppages which led to the summer of 1977 strikes in almost all sectors of activity. From the beginning of 1976, Algeria experienced work stoppages which led to the summer of 1977 strikes in almost all sectors of activity. The strikes continued intermittently through 1980, despite the abolition of the right to strike promulgated in 1978. The Algerian state is increasingly dependent on its hydrocarbon exports. Agriculture is neglected and the agrarian revolution fails. The poor economy is leading to a growing rural exodus, of the order of 100,000 people per year, aggravating the already acute housing crisis, upsetting an already fragile social and political climate. The devaluation of agricultural work caused the level of food self-sufficiency to drop dramatically, falling from 70% in 1969 to 30% in 1980. Thus, the majority of the food consumed in Algeria is imported from abroad. Overwhelmed by poverty, the Algerian people suffer from malnutrition. In 1981, 2/3 of Algerian children aged 0 to 5 were malnourished, while 60% of Algerian youth suffered from anemia and nutritional deficiencies. Migration continued to rise. The failure of industrialization and the agrarian revolution only worsened a trend rooted in the colonial era: mass emigration. If the Algerian population doubled in 20 years, from 12 to 24 million inhabitants, the number of immigrants in France alone tripled from 1962 to 1980, from 350,000 to nearly a million. Thus, in 18 years of independence and so-called socialist development, Algeria supplied France with as much labor as during the entire colonial period. This workforce is essentially Berber, as in the colonial era. According to the newspaper Le Monde, 70 to 80% of North African immigration to Europe, mainly in France, is of Berber origin. On the international level, the external debt increased from $2.7 billion in 1972 to $23.4 billion in 1979. As a result, Algeria became one of the most indebted countries in the Third World.